Matt, are you really going to miss the birth of your child just to close a deal? Deal's worth more than you're ever going to be, Stacy, Matt replied, his voice cold and detached as he fixed his tie. I stared at him, a lump forming in my throat. How did we get to this point? At 36 weeks pregnant and on maternity leave, I had slowly become accustomed to Matt's increasing absence. His real estate career consumed him, leaving little room for our marriage. Before my pregnancy, I was a dedicated marketing executive. Now, my days were filled with preparing for our baby boy, while Matt's days were filled with contracts and property viewings. Angie, my best friend since college, had been an incredible support. Stacy, you need to stop worrying about Matt and focus on yourself and the baby, she often said, her voice firm but kind. Easy for you to say, I replied once, tears pooling in my eyes. You're not married to a ghost. Angie squeezed my hand. You deserve better. Remember that. My parents, Lydia and Fred, lived nearby and were another source of steadiness in this storm. Dad helped set up the nursery, while Mom fussed over me, making sure I ate well and rested. Stacy, darling, you need to take it easy, Mom reminded me as she set a plate of food in front of me. Stress isn't good for the baby. Thanks, Mom. I forced a smile, eyes darting to my phone, hoping irrationally for a message from Matt. But there was nothing. Days turned into nights, and Matt's empty promises became a grim routine. He'd drag himself home late, reeking of deals and desperation. Busy night? I asked one evening when he finally stumbled in. Don't start, Stacy. I closed a huge deal today, he snapped, barely glancing at me. The tension grew, but I clung to hope that the birth of our child would bring him back to us. One late afternoon, while resting on the couch, the door clicked open. Hey, Matt, I began, only for my words to trail off as Angie walked in. Matt's not here? I shook my head. Out with clients again. She sighed deeply. Come on, let's get you out for a walk. Clear your head. We strolled slowly down our tree-lined street, Angie chatting about her latest project at work. The normalcy of it was a balm, if only temporary. Back home, I shuffled through the nursery, adjusting tiny socks and folding baby clothes. The car arrived, signaling Matt's return. Matt, can we talk? I began quietly. Not now, Stacy, he murmured, eyes glued to his phone. I bit my lip, fighting the urge to scream. How long could this continue? I placed a hand on my belly, feeling a tiny kick. Soon, I reminded myself. As the days passed, one question haunted me. Could Matt be the father our son needed? Mom, what am I going to do? I found myself asking during another quiet dinner. One step at a time, Stacy, she replied gently. We'll be here for you, no matter what. Matt's phone buzzed with another urgent message, and he picked up without hesitation. I glanced at him, heart heavy. The baby kicked again, a fierce reminder of the life about to change. Matt, I tried again, voice trembling, please be here when I need you, when our son needs you. He looked up briefly, a flicker of something in his eyes before it vanished. I'll do my best, Stacy. But his best, I feared, wouldn't be enough. The pain hit suddenly, sharp and twisting. I doubled over, gripping the kitchen counter. Mom, I cried out, struggling to catch my breath. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from Matt. Without even looking, I knew he wasn't coming. Stacy, what's wrong? Mom rushed in, panic in her eyes. I think it's time, I panted. Mom grabbed the hospital bag, guiding me to the car as Dad fired up the engine. Hang in there, sweetie. We're almost there, Dad reassured me. We made it to the hospital, nurses swiftly taking charge. I clutched Mom's hand as we moved down the brightly lit corridors. Call Matt, I gasped between contractions. I've called him 5 times, Mom said, worry etched on her face. He's not answering. Hours felt like days as the contractions grew stronger. The hospital room blurred, white walls closing in. You're doing great, Stacy, Mom cooed, wiping my forehead. With every push, all I could think about was Matt not being here, about him treating our child as less important than his precious deals. I ground my teeth, focusing on the baby's need to come out healthy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a wail filled the room. My son, my beautiful Nathan. He's perfect, Stacy, Mom said, tears streaming down her face as she handed him to me. I gazed at Nathan, emotions flooding me. The joy of holding him battled with the heartbreak of Matt's absence. As Nathan nestled in my arms, I forced myself to focus on his tiny face, his small breath against my skin. Meeting ran late. I'll come by later. Matt's text felt like a slap. I stared at his words, a cold anger growing inside me. Meeting ran late. Nothing about the birth of his son, just empty words delaying his inevitable absence. "Mom, he'll never change, will he?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. "One step at a time, honey," Mom replied, her voice breaking. Hours drifted by and Nathan fell asleep. Exhaustion took over and I dozed off with a tight grip on his little hand. I awoke to the shuffle of footsteps and the faint beep of machines, but no sign of Matt. Angie appeared, relief on her face. "How are you holding up, new mama? Look at him, Angie," I said, my voice fragile. "He's so beautiful." Angie leaned in to see Nathan, her expression softening. "He's perfect, Stacy. I'm sorry Matt's not here. You deserved better." Angie's words mirrored my own thoughts. Could I keep on hoping when it was clear Matt was never going to come through for us? Evening came, still no Matt. Nurses looked at me with kind pity, as did other new mothers with their partners by their sides. "Stacy, it's been a long day," Mom said gently. "Rest up. We'll take care of things." Nodding, I lay back, Nathan sleeping in his crib beside me. As fatigue pulled me under, one thing was painfully clear. Matt might never prioritize us. But as I glanced at Nathan, I knew I had to find a way forward. For him. For both of us. The hospital room door creaked open, and there stood Matt, looking at his phone instead of us. I glanced up from Nathan, my heart heavy with disappointment. "Finally decided to show up?" I said, unable to mask the bitterness in my voice. "Yeah, got here as soon as I could," he murmured, eyes still glued to his screen. "You missed our son's birth, Matt," I said softly, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He looked up briefly, barely glancing at Nathan before his gaze shifted back to his phone. "I had important clients, Stacy. It's not like you were alone. Your parents were here." I shook my head, disbelief all over my face. "He's your son. Doesn't that matter to you?" Matt sighed, slipping his phone into his pocket and finally stepping closer. He peered at Nathan, then back at me. "I'm here now, aren't I?" I didn't have the energy to argue. "Just hold him," I said, handing Nathan over. Matt held Nathan awkwardly, like he was a foreign object. His disconnect was palpable. "We need to talk, Matt," I began, watching him closely. "About us. About what's been happening." "Now? In the hospital?" He scoffed, eyebrow raised. "Yes, now. This can't wait," I insisted. "Our family can't wait." He handed Nathan back, turning towards the window. "What do you want me to say, Stacy? I'm trying to provide for us, to give us a good life." "A good life?" I echoed, incredulous. "A good life where you're never home? Where you miss the birth of your own child because of a meeting?" "You knew what you were marrying into," he snapped, finally locking eyes with me. "I told you my career was demanding." "But I didn't sign up for this neglect," I countered, keeping my voice steady. "You were different before. Where did that man go? People change, Stacy. This is who I am now. Deal with it." Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "What about Nathan? What kind of father will you be to him?" "I'll provide for him. Isn't that what matters?" he said coldly. Mom re-entered the room, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" "Fine, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just talking." Matt pulled out his phone again, an unmistakable signal that the conversation was over for him. "I have to head back to the office. I'll check in later." And just like that, he was gone. A few days later, I was discharged. As we arrived home, Matt was nowhere to be found. Instead, my parents were there, ready to help with Nathan's adjustment. "Welcome home," they exclaimed, bringing a small moment of joy. They helped me inside, talking about the future, but my mind kept drifting back to Matt's coldness. Flashbacks of our happy days taunted me, shared breakfasts, silly arguments over movies, and plans for a future that now seemed impossible. As I settled Nathan into his crib, I whispered, "We'll be okay, little one. I promise." Then, in a burst of determination, I pulled out my laptop and started searching. For answers, for help, for a way forward. Matt's neglect and ambition had pushed me to the edge, but for Nathan's sake, I would fight. He deserved better than this. We both did. Dad offered a comforting hug. "We're here for you, Stacy, whatever you need." I nodded, with tears finally spilling over. "Thank you, Dad. I'm going to need all the help I can get." I settled Nathan into his crib and stepped into the living room, where Matt sat with his laptop, typing away. The tension was thick as I took a deep breath. "Matt, we need to talk about our finances," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up briefly, a hint of annoyance on his face. "What about them?" "How much have you spent on the condo?" I asked, my palms sweaty. It's an investment, Stacy, he replied dismissively, eyes drifting back to his screen. It'll pay off. An investment with our savings? I pressed, voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. And loans? He looked up again, irritation clear. You don't understand how business works. I understand that you're risking our future for it, I stated, struggling to keep my composure. Matt finally closed his laptop, glaring at me. This is about providing for our family and making sure we have the best. Or is it about impressing your father? I shot back, the words out before I could stop them. His eyes narrowed dangerously. Don't bring my father into this. He's already in it, Matt. You're trying to impress him at our expense, I accused, the pieces falling into place. Just then, the front door opened and Greg walked in. He raised an eyebrow at the tension. Am I interrupting something? No, Greg, just catching up on business, Matt said, his demeanor suddenly cooler. Greg smirked, nodding toward me. Stacy, you good? I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yeah, I'm fine. After an awkward pause, Greg turned to Matt. Did you tell her about the plan with the inheritance? I froze, eyes wide. What plan? Matt's face turned beet red. Greg, that's none of her concern. Greg shrugged. She's your wife, she should know. What plan, Matt? I demanded, stepping closer. Matt's jaw tightened. It's nothing, just a way to secure our family's future. He's using Nathan to gain favor with Daddy, Greg interjected, ignoring Matt's glare. Hoping a grandkid in his corner seals the deal. Is that true, Matt? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Matt remained silent, his expression a cold mask. That silence said more than words ever could. I turned to Greg. Do you know how much debt Matt's gotten us into? Greg frowned. I didn't know the extent, but I figured it was bad. It's worse than you think, I murmured, feeling the weight of our situation. Good to know where your priorities are, Matt, Greg said disdainfully. I always knew you were a piece of work, but this? Using your kid? Matt snapped. Mind your own business, Greg. Greg shrugged, just looking out for Stacy and Nathan here. Unlike some people. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I turned to Matt. We're done, Matt. I can't do this anymore. Stacy, don't be dramatic, he scoffed. We're just going through a rough patch. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. This isn't a rough patch. It's our life, and you've ruined it. With that, I walked past Matt, past Greg, and into the room where Nathan slept peacefully, unaware of the storm outside. I knew one thing for certain. I had to protect him from this mess, from Matt's reckless ambition. The fight was just beginning, and I had to be ready. Greg's parting words echoed in my mind. If you need help, Stacy, you know where to find me. The door slammed behind me as I carried Nathan to the car, my heart racing. We're staying with my parents for a while, I said through gritted teeth, not even looking back at Matt. Stacy, don't do this. You're overreacting. Matt called after me. Ignoring him, I strapped Nathan into his car seat and started the engine. I drove in silence, anger and sorrow fighting for control. Upon reaching my parents' house, Mom and Dad were waiting on the porch, concern etched in their faces. What's happening? Dad asked as he took Nathan from my arms. Matt, he's ruining our lives with his schemes, I said, barely holding back tears. Inside, Mom offered me a hot tea while Dad rocked Nathan gently. Tell us everything, Mom urged. Between sips of tea, I recounted the details, the debt, the condo, Matt's twisted plan. Their expressions darkened with every word. He has the nerve to use Nathan as a pawn, Dad growled, his protective instincts kicking in. We'll sort this out. Later that evening, while Nathan napped, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Matt. We need to talk. Come home. I shook my head, knowing a meeting would only end in more frustration. Instead, I opened my laptop and began searching for legal advice. A fighting spirit gripped me. I couldn't let Matt ruin our lives. Days turned into a week. My parents helped with Nathan, providing a stable environment I sorely needed. Meanwhile, I met with several lawyers, finally retaining a fierce one who assured me I'd have a fighting chance. A knock on my parents' door startled me one evening. I opened it to find Matt standing there, an unfamiliar coldness in his eyes. Stacy, enough of this game. Come home, he demanded. This isn't a game, Matt. You've jeopardized our future, I replied, standing firm. You're making a big mistake, he sneered. Make this easy and come back. I crossed my arms, blocking the door. I won't let you drag Nathan and me down with you. Fine, he spat, tossing an envelope at me. Divorce papers. You're holding me back anyway. I stared at the envelope, shock rendering me speechless. Matt turned and walked away without another word. Mom came to stand beside me, her presence grounding me. What did he want? He's divorcing me, I whispered, the weight of the words crushing. Mom hugged me tight. We'll get through this, Stacy, together. Returning inside, I flipped through the papers. Anger welled up. Matt had not only left me, but he had also outlined visitation rights and property divisions that favored him outrageously. No way would I let him get away with this. Days later, I learned from mutual friends in whispered conversations that Matt had moved in with a wealthy client, Celeste. The betrayal added fuel to my fire. Mom, Dad, I'm fighting back. I'm not letting Matt walk over me, I declared one morning. Good for you, Dad said, pride in his voice. Angie also stepped up, offering support. You've got this, Stacy. Nathan deserves better, and so do you. Preparations began in earnest. My lawyer gathered evidence of Matt's neglect and financial recklessness. Greg's surprising support came as an unexpected boon. He hated Matt's tactics as much as I did. One evening, Greg said, Stacy, if you need anything, count on me. Matt's dug his own grave, and I'll help you cover him up. Nathan cooed in his crib while I fed him, my resolve strengthening. We're going to be okay, Nathan. I'll make sure of it. Despite Matt's attempts to drag us down, I felt a growing sense of purpose. The courtroom confrontation was coming, and I knew I had to be ready. For Nathan. For our future. For justice. Courtrooms always felt cold, no matter the season. Sitting beside my lawyer, Mrs. Hayes, the tension in the air thickened. Matt sat across from us with his attorney, looking smug as ever. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes began, her voice strong and clear, we present evidence of Mr. Miller's financial recklessness and neglectful behavior towards his family. My heart pounded as she laid out documents showing Matt's misuse of our savings and the loans he'd taken without my knowledge. Pictures of unfinished nursery projects and messages ignored while I was in labor flashed on the screen. Matt's attorney, Mr. Collins, tried to counter. These are measures Mr. Miller took to ensure financial stability. His investment in the condo is for the family's benefit. Mrs. Hayes didn't miss a beat. That so-called investment jeopardizes their future. More importantly, Mr. Miller's neglect cannot be justified. She turned towards me, offering a reassuring nod. Stacy, could you explain how Mr. Miller's actions have impacted your life and the life of your son? I stood, my legs slightly trembling but my voice steady. Matt has been absent, physically and emotionally. He missed our son's birth because he was at a meeting. He took our savings and put us in debt for a condo to impress clients and gain his father's approval. And now he's living with another woman, showing zero regard for our family. Matt fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight on his failures. A few days later, while preparing for another round in court, a knock on my door revealed Greg. I have something that might help, he said, handing over a folder. I opened it to find emails and text messages, proof of Matt's deceit and manipulation. That deal with Celeste, the financial strain, it's all here, Greg said. Use it. The next day in court, Mrs. Hayes presented Greg's evidence. Your Honor, these documents show Mr. Miller's manipulation of his own wife and his financial recklessness. Matt's face drained of color as every dirty detail was laid bare before the judge. As court recessed, I overheard Matt arguing with Celeste on a phone call. I did this for us. You knew what this was. He barked, but the line went dead. Celeste had hung up on him. His relationship with her crumbling was a small but satisfying vindication. Back in session, Matt was forced to admit his failings under cross-examination. His facade was crumbling, and the courtroom could see it. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice firm and decisive. Given the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Miller's actions were detrimental to the family's welfare. Full custody of Nathan Miller is awarded to Stacy Miller. Mr. Miller is required to sell the condo to settle debts and provide appropriate financial support to Stacy Miller and their son. A weight lifted off my shoulders. Relief washed over me as I hugged Mrs. Hayes, tears of gratitude streaming down my face. Matt looked utterly defeated, his once certain arrogance replaced by a grim realization of his downfall. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a new strength within me. I clutched Nathan close, knowing the fight had been worth it. Stacy, you did it, Mom said, embracing me outside the courthouse. We did it, I corrected, looking at my family and friends who stood by me. Greg approached with a small smile. Told you could count on me. Thank you, Greg, I said sincerely. As the crowd thinned, Angie squeezed my hand. What's next, Stacy? I looked at Nathan, then back at her. We start fresh, build a new life, one step at a time. We walked away from the courthouse, the future suddenly filled with possibilities. For Nathan. For me. For a new beginning without Matt's shadow looming over us. It was time to rebuild, stronger and wiser, ready to face whatever came next. Sitting in the courtroom once more was nerve-wracking, but I held my head high. This was the final showdown. Matt sat across from me, eyes cold and resentful. His facade of control was slipping, and everyone could see it. The judge's gavel came down, calling the court to order. Mrs. Hayes stood up, ready for battle. Your Honor, today we present further evidence showing Mr. Miller's ongoing neglect and financial irresponsibility. She displayed bank statements and documents highlighting the depths of Matt's financial mess. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of his recklessness. Matt's lawyer, Mr. Collins, tried to object. Your Honor, these were extreme measures taken to secure a better future for the family. The judge silenced him with a raised hand. Continue, Mrs. Hayes. She nodded and gestured toward Greg, who took the stand. Greg Miller, could you tell the court what you know about your brother's actions? Greg cleared his throat. Matt was always trying to impress our father. He used Stacy and Nathan to get ahead, using family money recklessly. He even tried manipulating Celeste, but that backfired. I watched Matt squirm, trying to maintain his composure, but failing. Mrs. Hayes pressed on. And what did you do when you discovered this? I gave Stacy the evidence to show how deceitful and irresponsible Matt has been, Greg answered. Matt shot Greg a venomous look. You've always been jealous. This is all about making me look bad. Greg's face remained impassive. No, Matt. This is about doing what's right. The judge leaned forward, her expression stern. Mr. Naff Miller, it's evident from the testimonies and evidence that your actions have been detrimental to your family. Stacy has shown great resilience, and it's clear she prioritizes Nathan's well-being. Therefore, I will uphold my previous ruling. Full custody remains with Stacy, and you will comply with all financial obligations. I exhaled, relief washing over me. Matt looked shattered as the realization of his defeat set in. As we exited the courtroom, he approached me one last time. Stacy, you don't have to do this. We can work something out. I shook my head firmly. You had your chances, Matt. This is what's best for Nathan. His eyes narrowed, revealing his vile nature once more. You'll regret this. I met his gaze head on. No, Matt. You're the one who'll regret losing us. Outside the courthouse, Angie met me with a tight hug. It's finally over. Yes, it is, I said, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in months. Mom and Dad joined us, their pride evident. We knew you could do it, Dad said, his voice filled with emotion. Greg approached, an awkward smile on his face. I'm just glad I could help. You did more than that, Greg, I said, giving him a grateful hug. Thank you. He nodded, stepping back to let me have my moment with Nathan. Holding my son close, I whispered, We did it, little one. We're free. As the days passed, Matt's financial situation worsened. He was forced to sell the condo, and his relationship with Celeste dissolved entirely. His professional reputation crumbled, and he was left grappling with the mess he'd created. Meanwhile, I focused on the future. With the legal battles behind us, I began to rebuild our lives. I returned to work in marketing, finding joy in my career once more. Nathan thrived in the loving environment my parents, friends, and I provided. One night, as Nathan slept peacefully, I glanced around our cozy home, feeling a wave of gratitude. The journey had been rough, but we emerged stronger. Karma had served its due course, and now it was time to embrace the new horizons ahead. I promised myself and Nathan that we'd face whatever came next with courage, resilience, and hope. The storm had passed, and we were ready to bask in the sunlight of new beginnings. Balancing work and motherhood proved challenging, yet rewarding. Every morning started with Nathan's cheerful giggles, a sound that fueled my day. I'd drop him off at Mom and Dad's, knowing he was in good hands, before heading to the office. Morning, Stacy, Angie said, greeting me with a warm smile as I walked in. Morning. Ready for the big presentation? I asked, feeling the familiar rush of excitement. Absolutely. Let's knock it out of the park, she replied, sharing my enthusiasm. Work offered a much-needed sense of normalcy and purpose. I threw myself into projects determined to showcase my skills and rebuild my career. My team rallied around me, respecting the balance I struck between being a professional and a mother. Back at home, evenings were filled with laughter and warmth. Nathan took his first steps, and I celebrated every milestone with my parents. Life started feeling like a new kind of normal. One evening, while feeding Nathan, my phone buzzed. A text from Greg. "Can we meet? Need to discuss something important." Curious but cautious, I agreed. We met at a local cafe where Greg's expression was serious. "Stacy, there's something you need to know," he began, his tone grave. "Matt's been trying to undermine you at the office, spreading lies to our father, hoping to turn him against you." My heart clenched. "Why won't he just leave us alone?" "Because he can't stand losing," Greg replied. "But listen, I've got an idea. There's still money involved from Dad's business, and I want to make sure Matt doesn't get his hands on it." I nodded, desperate to protect Nathan's future. "What do you need from me?" "Just your support. Together, we can redirect Dad's investments to benefit Nathan." "It's what he would have wanted," Greg explained. It was risky, but I trusted Greg. "All right, let's do this." Over the next few weeks, Greg and I worked tirelessly to secure the investments. We presented our case to his father, backed by evidence of Matt's manipulations. The old man listened, eventually agreeing to our plan. Matt's downfall continued. His schemes backfired, and he was left to grapple with the repercussions. Meanwhile, Greg and I ensured that Nathan's future was secure. One day, while playing with Nathan at the park, I felt a deep sense of peace. Angie joined us, watching Nathan toddle around with a grin on her face. "How's it feel to finally have everything sorted?" she asked. "Honestly, it's freeing," I responded, watching my son's joyful expression. "I didn't think we'd get here." Angie patted my shoulder. "You're stronger than you ever knew." As the days passed, Matt's presence in our lives faded. He struggled to find stability, his once promising career in shambles. Karma had come full circle, and he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, I thrived. My career flourished, and Nathan grew up in a loving, supportive environment. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving, building a future full of hope and promise. In a final gesture of gratitude, I decided to help Greg. His loyalty and support had been invaluable. Redirecting some of the investments to aid his startup, I ensured that Matt's former schemes benefited someone who truly deserved it. One evening, as the sun set, I sat on the porch with Nathan in my lap, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I had fought hard, and it had paid off. The future looked bright, and I was ready for whatever came next. Looking at the horizon, I whispered, "We've come a long way, little one. This is just the beginning." Nathan giggled, and I smiled, filled with hope and confidence. We were ready to embrace our new horizons together, stronger than ever. "Grace, you collapsed again? Unbelievable. Answer my calls, Grace. What kind of wife are you?" Eric's voice blares through the phone, cutting through the ambulance sirens. "I'm on my way to the hospital. I could lose the baby," I managed to say, holding back tears. The paramedics work around me, their faces focused and grim. Eric snorts on the other end. "Well, we're here starving because you can't make dinner. Now you're relaxing in a hospital? Get it together." My throat tightens as I try to steady my breath. A paramedic looks at me with concern. "You should focus on staying calm, ma'am. It's important for the baby." I nod, clenching my phone. "Eric, I'm doing my best. This isn't about dinner. It's our child." His response is a heavy, frustrated sigh. "Your best, huh? Seems like your best is just never enough." I hang up, unable to listen anymore. My heart pounds painfully in my chest, and not just from the physical strain. The paramedic shakes his head subtly. "We'll be at the hospital soon. Just keep breathing." As I lie there, the thoughts of Eric's constant criticism and indifference replay in my mind like an old scratched record. Every harsh word echoes louder in the cold, confined space of the ambulance. Upon arrival at the hospital, I'm quickly wheeled into the maternity ward. Nurses move with practiced efficiency, and I catch snippets of diagnosis and concern. My OB/GYN, Dr. Collins, arrives shortly after. "Grace, hang in there," she says with a calm yet urgent tone. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure both you and the baby are okay." I nod, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "Thank you, Dr. Collins." Hours pass, marked by the beeping of monitors and the quiet hum of hospital activity. It feels surreal, a stark contrast to the chaos of my home life. Dr. Collins updates me regularly, her calm demeanor a lifeline amidst the storm within me. Eventually, the tension eases. The baby is stable for now, she says, offering a reassuring smile, but you need to avoid stress. It's crucial. I nod weakly, knowing how impossible that request feels with Eric at home. I'll try, Doctor. The room grows silent once Dr. Collins leaves, except for the soft ticking of a nearby clock. I stare at it, counting the seconds, trying to slow my racing thoughts. I need to find a way out of this. My phone buzzes again, breaking the brief peace. It's a message from Eric. Don't expect me to come. Sort yourself out. I toss the phone aside, feeling a surge of something I haven't in weeks. Anger. What kind of person can't even show up when their wife is in the hospital, risking everything for their unborn child? That anger simmers, providing a strange comfort. Maybe it's time I started thinking about what I need, what the baby needs. Not just what Eric wants. This realization hits me like a wave, both terrifying and liberating. The door creaks open, and a nurse enters with a tray of food. Time to eat, Grace. You need your strength. I look at her, nodding. I'm not sure what my next steps will be, but one thing is clear. I need to get stronger. Strong enough to stand up for myself and my baby. Strong enough to face whatever comes next, even if that means facing Eric. I take the first bite, letting the warmth of the food seep into my bones. It's a small step, a simple action, but it feels like the beginning of something bigger, something necessary. For now, I focus on eating and breathing. The fight can wait until tomorrow. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, mimicking the flicker of emotions I felt inside. Leaning against the stark white hospital sheets, I closed my eyes, recalling a time when life seemed simpler. 2 years ago, I was one of the top marketing executives at my firm. I thrived on the rush of meetings, pitches, and late-night brainstorms. It was during one of these hectic days when I first met Eric. He wasn't always this way. Back then, he was charming and attentive, surprising me with coffee during those long nights, showering me with thoughtful gifts and making me laugh. The memory felt distant now, almost like a dream. Losing myself in work, I hadn't seen the warning signs when our whirlwind romance led to a rushed marriage. Within a year, I was pregnant, and it became clear that my role would need to change. Eric gently suggested that I become a stay-at-home wife. It's only until the baby arrives, he assured me, his arm around my shoulder. I agreed, believing him, and at the same time, believing in us. But as the months passed, the dynamic shifted. Eric's patience grew thinner, and his demands became relentless. This once affectionate man turned into someone colder, more critical with each passing day. Nurse, I called, needing a voice to break my chain of thoughts. Can I get some water? My voice sounded weaker than I expected. Of course, Mrs. Green, the nurse responded, smiling kindly. Thank you, I murmured. As simple as the gesture was, it reminded me of basic decency, something Eric's behavior often lacked now. The nurse returned with a cup and placed it on the side table. Try to rest, Mrs. Green. Stress isn't good for either of you. I nodded. Please call me Grace. All right, Grace, she said softly before stepping out. Her kindness was a balm, a stark contrast to what I faced daily. Eric's dismissive attitude wasn't confined to stressful moments. A week ago during a family dinner, his mother, Cheryl, pierced into me with her icy gaze. Grace, this casserole is too salty. And don't you think you should have a better grip on household chores by now? Before I could respond, Eric added, Mom's right, Grace. For someone staying at home, you should be more proficient with these things by now. I had smiled tightly, swallowing the retort burning at the back of my throat. I'm doing the best I can, Cheryl. Well, your best needs to improve, she shot back, her eyes never leaving mine. That night, as I cleaned the dishes alone, I asked Eric why he never defended me. They're my parents, Grace. I can't just argue with them over simple things. You need to handle it better. Handle it better. His words rang in my ears as I drank the water, thinking about how far I'd fallen from that confident executive to someone who now questioned her every move. But in this sterile hospital room, something new was budding, a resolve. Dr. Collins's words about stress and the nurse's simple kindness reminded me of a life beyond Eric's control. There was a world where I could be strong again, not just for me but for my child. I knew what needed to be done. Becoming that strong, independent woman again wouldn't be easy, but this collapsing, bending, and breaking needed to end. for my baby and for myself. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Dr. Collins, holding a clipboard. "Grace, can we talk?" she asked gently. I nodded, steeling myself. "Of course, Dr. Collins. What do I need to know?" "It's about balancing your health and any external stress," she began, and I knew this was just the start of a conversation about taking back control. Dark times lay ahead with Eric, but with each moment in that hospital, I found my determination strengthening. It wasn't just about staying healthy. It was about reclaiming my life, one day at a time. The sunlight streamed through the windows as I sat propped up in my hospital bed, sorting through the cascading thoughts in my mind. Just as I was about to sip some water, my phone buzzed. Cheryl's name popped on the screen, making my heart pound faster. "Grace, you've been in that hospital long enough. You need to come home and take care of your duties," she began without preamble. "I'm not just lying here out of choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to stay here for the baby's health." "Excuses," she scoffed. "You are a useless wife to my son, and it's high time you step up. We want dinner ready when Eric gets home." The line went dead, leaving me trembling with anger. I had just endured a terrifying health scare, yet all they could think about was dinner? Suddenly, the hospital door swung open, and Eric stormed in. "Grace, what's with you ignoring mother's calls?" His face twisted with irritation. "I was resting," I said, gripping the bed rails for support. "The doctor said I need to avoid stress." "You're stressed? What about me, Grace? I'm the one working all day to support us." "You think I don't work?" I shot back, surprising myself with the sharpness of my tone. "I just expect." Eric began, but he stopped mid-sentence as Cheryl swept into the room, her face a mask of cold fury. "Really, Grace? Making excuses to avoid your responsibilities?" She turned to Eric. "Your father and I never had these issues. We raised you with discipline, not laziness." I clenched my fists. "I'm doing the best I can, Cheryl. I'm carrying your grandchild, remember?" Cheryl snorted. "Carrying a child is no excuse. Women have been doing it forever without causing such a scene." Eric looked at me, his eyes void of any sympathy. "Mom's right. You need to pull yourself together." This was the family dynamic I suffered through daily, unyielding and often merciless. But today it felt different. Something inside me shifted. These people, all their criticisms and commands, they no longer had the power they once wielded over me. "You're right. I do need to pull myself together," I said, my voice firm. "For myself and this baby. Because this situation," I gestured around the sterile room, "is not working." Eric and Cheryl both stared at me, stunned. "Grace, don't make things harder on yourself," Cheryl warned, her voice dripping with disdain. "Harder on myself?" I laughed bitterly. "I'm barely surviving this as it is." Cheryl turned to Eric. "See, this is what you get for marrying someone so weak." "That's enough, Cheryl." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care anymore. "You've both said your piece. Now, leave me alone." Eric's eyes narrowed. "Don't push it, Grace." I met his gaze and didn't flinch. "Get out, Eric. I need rest, and you're not helping." They finally walked out, leaving me in the suffocating silence of the room. The door clicked shut, and for the first time, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. The realization washed over me. I couldn't continue like this. This wasn't living. I knew I needed an exit strategy. My mind flashed back to a happier time when I had friends and allies, people who cared. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could help pull me out from this abyss. It was time to reach out, to find the strength I'd buried for so long. The nurse shifted the curtains, letting in the morning light. I sat up, adjusting the pillows behind me. My body ached, but determination filled my veins. I needed a way out, and every second brought me closer to reaching out for help. The door cracked open. I expected another nurse, but in walked a blast from my past, ally. Her hair was shorter now, and she looked more confident than ever, but those piercing blue eyes were unmistakable. "Grace?" she asked, her face a mixture of surprise and concern. I blinked, feeling a rush of emotions. "Ally, what are you doing here?" She came closer, grabbing a chair and sitting by the bedside. "I was visiting a business associate, and I saw your name on the board. What happened?" I took a deep breath. "Well, it's a long story. Basically years of stress and, well, Eric." Her smile vanished. "Eric? Your husband?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I've tried for so long to make it work, but it's been a nightmare. His emotional abuse, his family, I'm barely holding on. Ally leaned back in her chair, assessing me. That doesn't sound like the Grace I knew. The Grace I knew was a powerhouse. My eyes welled up with tears. I don't feel like a powerhouse anymore. Well, she said firmly, it's never too late to change that. How serious is your health? The baby's stable for now, I explained, but I need to avoid stress. And Eric's not making that easy, is he? She asked, already knowing the answer. No, he isn't. Ally nodded thoughtfully. Grace, what if I told you that you don't have to go back to that life? I can help you start over. Her words felt like a lifeline. What do you mean? I have an apartment downtown, Ally said. It's empty and you can stay there rent-free. It's a fresh start. My mind raced. Wouldn't it be too much trouble? Not at all, Ally assured me. You focus on your health and the baby. We can take it from there. The relief was overwhelming, but realistic worries clouded my mind. Eric would never let me go easily. What about Eric? Ally's face turned serious. We'll deal with him. For now, you need to get better. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. I know someone who specializes in family law. He can help you with whatever you need to do next. Each word she spoke felt like another piece of armor being placed around me. For the first time in months, I felt something akin to hope. Why are you doing this for me, Ally? We've been through a lot, Grace, she replied. You've always been there for me. Now it's my turn to help you. And I can't stand seeing you like this. Her offer was more than just a place to stay. It was a chance to rebuild my life. Thank you, Ally. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll take care of yourself, she said, squeezing my hand. And if you need anything at all, you call me. The conversation with Ally left me with a renewed sense of purpose. As she left to make a few calls, I leaned back against the pillows. I couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, I could shape a better future. I had much to think about, but one thing was clear. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had Ally, and with her support, I might just find a way to reclaim my life and protect my baby. A few days after being discharged from the hospital, I found myself in Ally's downtown apartment. It was small but warm and cozy, a world apart from the cold, tension-filled atmosphere of my home with Eric. I settled into the couch, feeling a strange combination of relief and anxiety. Ally bustled around, unpacking groceries she had brought. You need to rest, Grace. Let me handle this. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you, I said sincerely. You'll do just fine, she replied with a reassuring smile. We need to talk, though, about the plan. The seriousness in her tone made my heart beat faster. What do we need to do? Ally handed me a slip of paper. This is the contact information for a great family lawyer I know. His name is Mark Jensen. He's got a reputation for handling messy divorces. I took the paper, feeling its weight. This was a significant step. When should I call him? Ally looked at me, her eyes fierce. The sooner, the better. Eric isn't going to let you go easily. You need legal protection. I nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. You're right. I'll call him tomorrow. The next day, as planned, I dialed the number on the paper. Mark's assistant answered, and soon I was connected to the lawyer himself. Grace, I've been briefed by Ally about your situation, Mark said, his voice calm and professional. I want you to know that you have options. I don't want a drawn-out fight, I stammered, fear creeping into my voice. Understandable, he replied, but we need to ensure you and your baby are safe. Document everything, every threat, every act of aggression. I shivered, the memories flooding back. Okay, I'll do that. We'll also file for a restraining order if necessary, Mark continued, and I'll guide you through the divorce process. You're not alone, Grace. After hanging up, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Days turned into weeks, and I slowly settled into a semblance of a new routine. Ally visited often, and her daughter Hannah dropped by with thoughtful gifts for the baby. One evening, I decided to open up to Hannah about Eric. Eric's not who you think he is, I began cautiously. Hannah frowned, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. He's been emotionally abusive. His family, too. I can't live like that anymore. Hannah's face hardened. I work with him, you know. He's not exactly kind there either, but I never knew it was this bad. I nodded, feeling a bond forming. I'm glad you know now. Hannah's eyes flashed with determination. I can keep an eye on him, let you know if he's planning anything." "Thank you. That would mean a lot," I said, feeling a surge of gratitude. Over time, Hannah's updates about Eric became a crucial part of my strategy. She reported his growing frustration at work, his dismissive attitude towards colleagues, and the whispers of a possible demotion due to his behavior. Each piece of information was another brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. One afternoon, I received a call from Mark. "Grace, I filed the initial divorce papers. Eric will be served soon. Be prepared for his reaction." My heart pounded. What should I expect? He'll likely be angry, but remember, you're doing this for your safety and your baby's future. "Stay strong," Mark counseled. Ally arrived shortly after, sitting beside me on the couch. "Whatever happens next, you have support. We're in this together." I squeezed her hand, feeling the truth in her words. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer the same scared woman in the hospital. I was stronger now, surrounded by people who believed in me. As I held my growing belly, I whispered, "We're going to be okay. We have to be." In that moment, I knew I had already made the most pivotal move towards reclaiming my life. The road ahead was daunting, but I was ready to face it, step by cautious step, surrounded by newfound allies and an unyielding resolve. I was at my weekly checkup at the hospital, waiting for Dr. Collins when the door burst open. Eric stormed in, his eyes wild and angry. He hadn't made contact since the divorce papers were served. I had hoped he'd stay away, but deep down I knew better. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Grace?" he barked, marching up to the examination chair, his face inches from mine. "You think you can just walk out and take my child with you?" My heart pounded in my chest. "Eric, please, calm down. This is a hospital." "Calm down?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. "You're trying to ruin my life." Before I could respond, Dr. Collins entered, eyes wide. "Excuse me, sir. You can't barge in here like this." Eric turned on her, finger pointing. "This is between me and my wife." I stood up, facing him. "No, Eric, it's about me and my baby, and you need to leave." His eyes narrowed, his face contorting with rage. "You think you can do this? You think you can just leave me and everything will be fine?" Suddenly, the door swung open again. Hannah stepped in, glaring at Eric. "Back off, Eric." "What the hell are you doing here?" Eric spat, his anger shifting to her. Hannah crossed her arms. "Protecting Grace. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police." Eric's face turned red with fury. "You're just as deluded as she is. This was a mistake from the start." "Eric, get out," I said, my voice quivering but firm. "I've hired a lawyer. We're getting a divorce." He looked at me, stunned for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "You'll come crawling back once this fantasy of yours crumbles." Hannah stepped closer to Eric, her voice dangerously low. "Get out, now!" Eric finally seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. He glanced between us, his teeth clenched in anger. "You'll regret this, Grace." As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I sank back into the chair, shaking. Hannah sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "You did the right thing, Grace." Dr. Collins nodded, her face a mask of concern. "Do you want me to call security? Make sure he doesn't come back?" I shook my head, trying to steady my breath. "No, it's okay. He's gone for now." Hannah looked at me, her eyes soft with sympathy. "Are you all right?" I managed a nod. "I think so. Thank you, Hannah." "We're in this together, remember?" she said, squeezing my hand. Dr. Collins finished the checkup, assuring me that the baby was fine. But the encounter with Eric left a lingering tension in the air. As Hannah and I left the hospital, she turned to me. "Now's the time to stand firm. Don't let him intimidate you." "I know," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. "I can't go back. Not now." Hannah smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. "And you won't. We'll make sure of it." As we got into the car, a new determination settled over me. Eric's reaction didn't surprise me, but it did remind me of just how far I'd come and how much farther I still had to go. The road ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't walking it alone. With Hannah, Ally, and the support of my new allies, I felt a flicker of hope. The fight for my freedom had only just begun, but with every step, I grew stronger, more resolved. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that this time, I had the strength and support to stand my ground. It had been a week since Eric's outburst at the hospital, and I had finally started to feel a semblance of peace in Ally's apartment. My morning was quiet until my phone buzzed with a call from Allie. "Grace, "Turn on the local news," she said, her voice urgent. I fumbled for the remote, switching on the TV just in time to see Eric's face plastered on the screen. Local businessman Eric Green faces allegations of workplace harassment and creating a hostile environment. Reliable sources indicate a demotion is imminent, the reporter explained. My heart raced. I could hardly believe what I was hearing, but a sense of vindication washed over me. Ally's voice interrupted my thoughts. "You see that? He's getting what he deserves." "How did this happen?" I asked, still in shock. "Hannah, she gathered evidence, reported it. She knew the right people to make sure it didn't get swept under the rug," Ally explained. Just as I hung up, Hannah walked through the door, a look of triumph on her face. "Saw the news?" "I did. I don't know how to thank you," I said, voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet. Eric's not going down without a fight," Hannah replied, her face turning serious. We sat on the couch, the TV now muted. "I've arranged for extra security at your building. Until the restraining order is finalized, we can't be too careful," she said. The thought of Eric trying to retaliate sent shivers down my spine. "Do you really think he'll try something?" Hannah nodded. "I wouldn't put it past him. But you're not alone. We've got your back." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation, but also the strength of my support system. I'm ready for whatever comes. Hannah's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, frowning. "It's him. He's been calling, leaving threats." I grabbed her wrist. "What kind of threats?" She looked at me, eyes filled with concern. "Saying he'll make sure you regret leaving him. He's desperate, Grace." I closed my eyes, anger replacing my fear. "Let him try. I'm done being scared of him." The next few days were tense. Everywhere I went, I felt the shadow of Eric lurking, but I refused to let it control me. Ally and Hannah were relentless in their support, staying close and checking in frequently. One evening, Mark called, his tone somber. "Grace, we need to talk. Eric's lawyer reached out. He's going to fight the divorce hard, especially for custody." Of course he would. What do? "We prepare, gather all evidence of his abuse, his threats. We build your case solid," Mark advised. I nodded, the determination in his voice bolstering my resolve. I'll do whatever it takes. Weeks turned into a blur of preparations and cautious living. Eric's demotion became official, and rumors swirled about his troubles at the workplace. Hannah's intel kept me informed, making sure I stayed a step ahead. Finally, the day came for the divorce hearing. Standing outside the courtroom, my heart pounded. Ally held my hand, her presence a steadying force. "You've got this, Grace. Show them the strong woman you are," she whispered. As we walked into the courtroom, Eric's glare bore into me. He looked disheveled, his arrogant demeanor now marred by desperation. I stood tall, ready to face him. The proceedings were arduous, but Mark was relentless, presenting every piece of evidence we had meticulously collected. Eric's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable and unfit, but the truth was undeniable. At the end of it all, the judge ruled in my favor. Eric's abusive behavior, his threats, the hostile work environment, all weighed too heavily against him. As I walked out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Eric's defeat was a victory not just for me, but for my unborn child. I had fought, and I had won. But most importantly, I had reclaimed my life, ready to start anew. The day I left the courthouse felt surreal. The fight was over, and I had won. And yet the future felt like an unknown expanse, stretching out before me. I returned to Ally's apartment, my temporary sanctuary, feeling both relieved and uncertain. A few weeks later, I was sitting in Ally's office, now officially part of her team. I was grateful for the job and the chance to rebuild my life. It felt good to use my skills again and to be surrounded by supportive faces. Ally walked in, holding a tiny blue onesie. "For the little guy," she said, handing it to me. I smiled, running my fingers over the soft fabric. "Thank you, Ally. You've done so much for us. Your family, Grace. And speaking of family," she hesitated, then continued, "I want you to meet someone." She led me to a conference room where a man in his mid-40s sat. He smiled warmly as we entered. "Grace, this is John. John, this is Grace." John stood up, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you, Grace. Ally's told me a lot about you." "Nice to meet you too," I said, shaking his hand, feeling a bit curious. "John is a therapist," Ally explained. "I thought it might help to talk." I nodded, feeling a bit overwhelmed but understanding her intention. "Thanks, Ally. I'll consider it." As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I felt a mixture of gratitude and doubt. Could I really put all this behind me? Months passed, and my life began to stabilize. I worked hard, focusing on my pregnancy and my new job. Hannah stayed close, her friendship becoming a beacon of light in my chaotic world. One afternoon, Ally called me into her office. "Grace, I have an offer for you." "What is it?" I asked, curious. She handed me a folder, an opportunity to lead a new project, something I think you'll excel in. I opened the folder and scanned the details. It was a challenging project, but also a chance to prove myself once more. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ally smiled. "You deserve this." "All right," I said, feeling a surge of excitement. "Yes." As I left her office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Hannah. "Can you meet me at the park? I have news." I hurried over, finding her sitting on a bench, looking excited. "What's up?" She grinned. "Eric got fired today. They finally had enough of his behavior." A flood of emotions swirled inside me, but mostly relief. Wow. I don't even know what to say. Hannah laughed. "Just breathe, Grace. Karma's doing its job." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and laughing, a sense of closure settling over me. That night, as I lay in bed, feeling my baby's kicks, I finally felt at peace. Eric was out of my life, and a new chapter was beginning. I whispered, "We're going to be okay, little one." The months rolled by, and soon it was time. I went into labor late one night, and Ally rushed me to the hospital. The delivery was intense, but the moment I held my son in my arms, everything else faded away. "You did it," Ally whispered, tears in her eyes. "No, we did it," I corrected, feeling the weight of our journey. As I cradled my son, I realized that the darkest moments of my life had led me to this point. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, surrounded by people who loved and believed in me. In the following days, I took up Allie on her suggestion to meet John for therapy. It helped me to process everything I'd been through and to rebuild my confidence. When I returned to work, Ally officially offered me the role of project lead. I accepted, feeling ready to take on the world. And so, surrounded by a new family of friends and allies, I stepped into my new life with determination and a hopeful heart. My son and I were ready for whatever came next, knowing we had already overcome the hardest battles. We were ready to face the future together.